The morning sun filtered through the pines surrounding the Lakota encampment, casting long shadows across the frost-covered grass. Winona pressed her back against the leather wall of her family's teepee, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. She had noticed him again. 3 times this week, Chayton had walked past her family's dwelling, always at dawn, always when she was preparing water for the day's cooking. He never stopped. He never spoke. But something in the deliberate rhythm of his footsteps, in the way he adjusted his buffalo robe just as he passed, told her everything. In her world, among the Plains tribes of the Northern Territories, young men and women did not simply declare their intentions. Words were considered too crude, too direct for matters of the heart. The language of attraction lived in gestures so subtle that outsiders might miss them entirely, yet so meaningful that an entire community could read a courtship unfolding like a story written in smoke. Chayton was 20 summers old, a hunter of growing reputation. His shoulders had broadened over the past year, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had proven his worth during the autumn buffalo hunt. But prowess with a bow meant nothing if he could not master the more delicate art of courtship. His father had warned him, approach too directly, and you shame both families. Move too slowly, and another suitor might claim her attention. Winona knew the rules as well as any young woman in the tribe. At 18 summers, she had already turned away 2 suitors, each time through the silent vocabulary her grandmother had taught her. A blanket pulled too tightly around the shoulders during a communal gathering, eyes that looked past rather than at, small adjustments in posture that closed rather than opened. But Chayton was different. She had first noticed him during the summer solstice celebration, when the entire tribe had gathered to give thanks for the season's abundance. He had been sitting across the great fire, and when their eyes had met for just a moment, he had done something unexpected. Instead of looking away quickly, as most young men did, he had held her gaze for exactly 3 heartbeats before turning his attention back to the elder who was speaking. Not too long, not too short, just enough to signal awareness without aggression. The days that followed had been a study in restraint. Chayton began appearing at the river where the women gathered water, though his own family's teepee was on the opposite side of the encampment. He would arrive with his younger sister, ostensibly to help her carry vessels, but he would position himself where Winona could observe him, not close enough to intrude, not far enough to be forgotten. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, because we share untold stories of human connection that will change the way you see relationships forever. Winona found herself adjusting her own behavior in response. She began wearing her best shell necklace, the one her aunt had given her, passed down through 3 generations of women in her family. She arranged her hair with 2 small feathers, positioned at an angle that her grandmother had once explained meant, "I am observing." She moved through the encampment with a deliberate grace, knowing that her every gesture was being read not just by Chayton, but by the entire community of watchers. The old women noticed first. They always did. Winona's grandmother, Takoda, had been watching her granddaughter with the knowing eyes of someone who had guided countless courtships through the invisible channels of tribal protocol. One evening, as they prepared venison for smoking, Takoda spoke without looking up from her work. "The hunter who walks past our dwelling each morning," she said, her voice neutral, "he has a good reputation. His family is respected. His father brought down 3 buffalo in the autumn hunt." "I have noticed his presence," Winona replied, matching her grandmother's careful tone. "He seems to carry himself with honor." The words were simple, but in their simplicity lay volumes. That night, through channels so old and established that no one needed to explain how the message had been conveyed, Chayton's father learned that his son's attention had been noticed and was not unwelcome. It simply was known. Understanding this, Chayton made his next move. During a communal gathering where families shared food and stories, he took a position near the fire where Winona's family had settled. Not beside them. That would have been too presumptuous. But close enough that when he began speaking with one of the older hunters about tracking techniques, his voice would carry to where she sat. He spoke with knowledge and humility, asking questions that showed wisdom rather than arrogance. As the evening deepened and families began returning to their dwellings, Chayton stood to leave with his parents. In the moment of transition, He passed close enough to Winona's position that she could smell the sage smoke clinging to his buffalo robe. He did not look at her directly. Instead, he let his hand brush against a willow branch that hung near the path, causing it to sway gently. The willow was sacred to her tribe, associated with flexibility and strength. She waited until he had taken 3 more steps. Then, with a movement so small it might have been mistaken for adjusting her seating position, she touched the same willow branch, steadying it, acknowledging his gesture with one of her own. The exchange had lasted less than 5 seconds. No words, no direct eye contact, but volumes had been spoken. 3 mornings later, Winona woke to a sound she had never heard directed toward her, though she had heard it many times in the encampment. A flute, its melody floating through the pre-dawn darkness, carrying across the frost-hardened ground with crystalline clarity. She knew immediately what it meant. Among the Plains tribes, the courting flute was perhaps the most direct form of musical communication a young man could employ. Yet even this was governed by strict protocols. The flute player could not position himself too close to his intended's dwelling, as that would be considered aggressive and disrespectful to her family. Chayton stood beneath a cottonwood tree approximately 200 paces from Winona's teepee, his fingers moving across the holes of the cedar flute his uncle had helped him craft over the past month. He played a sequence his father had taught him, one that translated roughly to, "I see you as the dawn sees the prairie," illuminating what was hidden in darkness. The metaphor was important. He was not claiming to possess her or control her. He was acknowledging her as a source of revelation. Inside the teepee, Winona's mother was already awake, her ear turned toward the music. She glanced at her daughter, reading the slight tension in Winona's shoulders. The mother said nothing, but she did not move to stop the music or signal disapproval. This was permission, tacit but clear. Winona rose quietly, wrapping her warmest buffalo robe around her shoulders. She did not step outside. That would have been too direct. Instead, she moved to the teepee entrance where a small gap in the leather allowed her to stand just inside, visible as a silhouette to anyone watching from the proper distance. She stood there for exactly the length of 2 complete melody sequences. Her presence in that position, neither hidden nor fully revealed, was its own form of response. Chayton felt his heart rate increase when he saw the shadow appear in the entrance. He had not expected a response this quickly. Some young women made suitors play for weeks before even acknowledging the music, but Winona was showing him respect by not making him wait unnecessarily. As the sun began its climb above the horizon, Winona prepared for her daily water-gathering routine. This task was one of the few times when young people could observe each other in a semi-public setting without the immediate presence of family. She arrived at the riverbank to find several other women already there, including 2 of her cousins and an aunt. They greeted her with knowing smiles, but said nothing about the flute music that had surely reached their dwellings as well. Chayton arrived with his younger sister, as he had been doing for the past week, but today there was a subtle difference in his approach. He demonstrated to his sister how to secure a heavy water bag so that the weight distributed evenly across the shoulders. It was a teaching moment, but it was also a display of practical knowledge, of the kind of skills that would make him a valuable partner. Winona watched from the corner of her eye as she knelt to fill her own containers. Chayton's hands moved with practiced efficiency, his explanations clear and patient. His sister asked questions, and he answered them with respect. A man who treated his sister with respect would likely treat a wife with similar consideration. When Winona rose to leave, she took a path that required her to pass relatively close to where Chayton worked with his sister. As she approached, she adjusted her grip on one vessel, causing a small amount of water to spill onto the earth. Chayton looked up at the sound, and for exactly 2 heartbeats their eyes met directly. In those 2 seconds, an entire conversation occurred. His eyes asked, "Am I proceeding correctly?" Her eyes answered, "Yes, continue." And then, the moment ended. The days that followed established a rhythm. Each morning before dawn, the flute sang its question across the frost-covered grass. Each morning, Winona stood in the teepee entrance for exactly long enough to acknowledge the music. Each day, at the river, their paths would cross in ways that appeared coincidental but were carefully calculated. One morning, Chayton varied the flute melody slightly. introducing a sequence that translated approximately to, "Your presence makes the world more vivid, as rain makes colors deeper." It was a more intimate declaration than he had previously risked. Inside the teepee, Winona felt her breath catch. She recognized the melody from stories her grandmother had told. It required a response more substantial than simple acknowledgement. Then, with a decisiveness that surprised even herself, she did something bold. Instead of standing in the shadow of the entrance, she stepped completely outside, wrapped in her buffalo robe, visible in the pre-dawn light. She simply stood there, facing the east where the sun would soon rise, her silhouette clear against the gradually lightening sky. She remained there for 3 full melody sequences before returning to the warmth of the teepee. From his position beneath the cottonwood, Chaitan felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly caused him to miss a note. She had stepped outside. She had made herself fully visible. The courtship had just advanced to a new level. The morning frost had begun to melt under the strengthening sun when Winona emerged from her family's teepee to find something that made her heart race. Hanging from the low branch of the chokecherry tree that grew near their dwelling was a small bundle, wrapped in soft deerskin and tied with sinew dyed a deep red. A gift. The next stage in the courtship ritual. Her grandmother appeared at her shoulder. Tekoda examined the gift without touching it, her experienced eyes reading details that Winona was still learning to see. "The leather is well prepared," she murmured. "The dye is even, suggesting patience in the making. The placement respects our dwelling." Winona reached out carefully, untying the sinew and unfolding the deerskin. Inside lay 3 items, each chosen with obvious care. The first was a small carved bone, shaped like a bird in flight. A meadowlark, known for its beautiful song, and its role as a messenger between earth and sky. The message was clear. Chaitan saw himself as a messenger, carrying his intentions toward her. The second item was a strand of blue beads, carefully shaped and polished. Blue was the color of sky and water, symbolizing both freedom and devotion. That he had included this color spoke to his understanding of what she valued, not possession, but partnership. The third item made tears spring to her eyes. It was a small pouch containing dried wild plums, her favorite food. He had somehow learned this detail and remembered it. The plums demonstrated attention, the kind of listening that went beyond words. Tekoda nodded slowly. "This young man understands the language of meaning," she said. "Now you must decide how to answer. Leave a comment saying, 'This is how real connection is built if this moment touched your heart,' because I want to know who truly values these stories of authentic human emotion." Winona spent the entire day considering her response. In her culture, a gift required an answer, but the answer had to be proportional, appropriate, and equally thoughtful. She consulted with her mother and aunt, but it was Tekoda who offered the insight that resolved Winona's uncertainty. "What do you want him to know about you?" the old woman asked. "Not what you think he wants to hear, but what truth about yourself do you want him to carry forward?" That evening, Winona completed her response. She had created a small leather pouch, decorated with quill work in a pattern that represented her family's lineage. Inside, she placed 3 items of her own. The first was a small bundle of sweetgrass braided and tied. Sweetgrass was sacred, used in prayers and ceremonies. By giving it, she was acknowledging the spiritual dimension of their potential union. The second item was a carefully preserved wildflower, pressed flat and still retaining its bright yellow color. Including it was a way of saying that she approached this courtship with joy rather than obligation. The third item was the most personal. It was a small piece of leather on which she had painted a simple scene. 2 figures standing on opposite sides of a river, each reaching toward the other but not yet touching. The river was neither wide nor turbulent, suggesting that the gap was bridgeable but required intentional effort from both sides. She arranged for her younger brother to place the bundle at the river the next morning, under the large stone where the women sometimes set their water vessels. Chaitan arrived at the river with his younger sister as usual. It was his sister who spotted the bundle. His heart began to race as he approached the stone and saw the wrapped package. He did not open it there at the river. That would have been inappropriate. Instead, He walked back to his family's dwelling with composure that cost him significant effort to maintain. In his family's tipi, with only his closest relatives present, Chaitan unwrapped the bundle. When he revealed the painted leather showing two figures reaching across a river, his father smiled. "She is wise," his father said simply. "She understands that partnership requires two people who choose to move toward each other. She will make a good partner in the work of building a life." That night, Chaitan made a decision. It was time to move toward the next stage, the one that would involve the formal participation of both families. 3 days after the exchange of gifts, Chaitan's father requested a private audience with the tribal elder council. This was the traditional next step, the moment when a courtship began to involve the broader community in formal recognition. The meeting took place in the council lodge. Chaitan accompanied his father, along with his eldest uncle. They brought gifts for the council, tobacco for the men, dried berries for the women. Chaitan's father began to speak. "I come before you to discuss a matter that concerns the future of our families. My son, Chaitan, has been conducting himself with honor in his pursuit of courtship with Winona. I seek the council's observation and guidance as we consider moving toward formal proposal." One of the elder women, White Owl, leaned forward. "We have been watching," she said, her voice carrying the authority of 7 decades of life. "The young people have shown appropriate restraint and respect for tradition. We see no reason to object," she paused. "However, we would counsel patience. Let the winter season test the commitment. Let the long darkness and cold reveal whether this interest is built on genuine compatibility." The council was not forbidding the courtship, but they were recommending a longer period of observation. Winter was the hardest season. A couple who could maintain respect and interest through winter's challenges would likely have the foundation for a lasting partnership. The winter progressed with its characteristic challenges, but through it all, Chaitan and Winona maintained their patterns of interaction. The flute music continued, though less frequently due to the weather. Winona began leaving small markers near the river, stones arranged in patterns that signaled her continued interest. The elder women continued their observations. The community consensus began to shift from cautious observation to quiet support. The young people were proving themselves worthy. As the winter solstice approached, the elder council met again. This time the discussion was brief. The young people had demonstrated the qualities the tribe valued. White Owl delivered the council's decision to both families. "The winter has revealed what we needed to see. These young people are ready to move forward. We give our blessing for the formal proposal to proceed according to tradition." The morning of the formal proposal arrived with crystalline clarity. Chaitan had been awake since well before dawn, his mind reviewing every protocol, every gesture, every word he would need to speak. His father had gathered the necessary gifts over the past week: buffalo robes, horses, tools, and food. Each item had been carefully chosen, representing months of accumulated labor and resources. The procession formed outside his family's dwelling. Chaitan's father led, followed by Chaitan, then his uncle and elder brother. Behind them came his mother and sisters, carrying some of the gifts. The group moved slowly through the encampment, their passage observed by nearly every member of the tribe. At Winona's family dwelling, her father and uncles stood waiting. Chaitan's father stepped forward first. "We come with respect to your family and honor for your daughter. My son Chaitan wishes to propose marriage according to the traditions of our people." Winona's father received these words with gravity. "We have observed your son's conduct throughout the seasons. We are willing to hear his proposal." Chaitan stepped forward. "Honored father, respected elders, beloved family," he began, "I come before you to ask for the greatest honor a man can receive, the partnership of your daughter Winona. I have watched her throughout the seasons. I have seen her kindness to elders, her patience with children, her skill in the daily work of survival." He continued, infusing the traditional words with genuine emotion. "I offer myself as a partner worthy of her consideration. I understand that marriage is not about possession, but about partnership. I see in Winona not someone to complete me, but someone with whom I can build something greater than either of us could create alone." Winona's father turned toward the dwelling. "Let my daughter come forth. Let her hear what is being offered and decide if she wishes to accept." Winona emerged, dressed in her finest clothing. She moved with graceful dignity, taking her place beside her father. Chaitan met her gaze directly. "Winona," he said, addressing her by name for the first time in their courtship, "I ask you to consider becoming my wife. I promise to honor you as my partner, to provide for our household, to stand beside you through whatever challenges and joys the future brings." Winona looked at Chaitan, seeing in his eyes the same qualities she had been observing for months: respect, patience, genuine care. She looked into her own heart, listening to what it told her about this man, this potential partner. "Chaitan," she said, her voice carrying clearly, "I have observed you throughout the seasons. I have seen your character in times of ease and times of hardship. I have witnessed your respect for elders, your service to the tribe, your honoring of tradition." She paused. "I accept your proposal. I agree to become your wife, to be your partner in building a life." The gathering burst into celebration. The elder women began their ululating cries of joy. The men raised their voices in songs of blessing. Chaitan and Winona stood at the center of this celebration, their hands finally meeting in the first deliberate touch of their courtship. The winter dawn arrived wrapped in pearl-gray light. Winona woke in her family's teepee for the final time as an unmarried woman. Tomorrow would bring the formal wedding ceremony, but today was reserved for preparation. Her grandmother entered quietly, carrying a bundle. "Come, granddaughter," Dakota said. "There are things you must know before tomorrow brings its changes." They sat together by the fire, and Dakota began to unpack the bundle. Inside were items representing generations of wisdom: tools, medicines, a dress worn by Winona's great-grandmother on her own wedding day. "Marriage," Dakota began, "is the continuation of everything you have learned during courtship, but deepened. The language of gestures does not end when words of commitment are spoken. It evolves." She held up dried sage. "In marriage, you will learn new ways to use old knowledge, burning sage when tensions rise, offering it when words fail to express gratitude." Throughout the day, Winona's aunts and female cousins arrived with gifts and advice. Each woman shared wisdom gleaned from years of partnership. While Winona received instruction, Chaitan underwent his own preparations with the men. His father took him hunting, ostensibly to provide fresh meat for tomorrow's feast, but more importantly to have time alone for necessary conversations. "Tomorrow you become responsible not just for yourself, but for another person's well-being," his father said. "Your wife will depend on you for protection, provision, and partnership, but she is not your possession. She is your equal, chosen through mutual consent." The evening before the wedding ceremony, both families gathered for a quiet meal. Chaitan and Winona sat together, no longer separated by courtship protocols. They could speak openly now, though they chose mostly to sit in comfortable silence, hands intertwined. That night, Winona lay under her buffalo robes for the last time in her childhood home. She thought about their courtship, the months of careful observation and subtle communication. Every moment had been leading to this threshold. In the pre-dawn darkness, Winona rose and stepped outside. The stars were beginning to fade. She stood there, watching the east lighten gradually, thinking about beginnings and transitions. Behind her, she heard movement and turned to see Chaitan emerging from his family's dwelling. He too had been unable to sleep. They began walking toward each other. They met in the middle, in the space between their two families. They did not speak. Instead, they simply stood together, hands finding each other naturally, watching the sun rise on their final day as unmarried individuals. "Are you ready?" Chaitan finally asked. "I am ready," Winona replied. The day unfolded with the beauty of ritual performed with communal blessing. The wedding ceremony brought together the entire tribe. Chaitan and Winona spoke vows that echoed through centuries, promises that carried the weight of tradition and the freshness of personal meaning. When the ceremony concluded and the feasting began, Chaitan and Winona finally found themselves alone together in the teepee prepared for them. No words needed to be spoken. They had spent months learning each other's language. Now they would begin learning a new language together, the intimate vocabulary of partnership. Outside, the celebration continued. Inside, Two people who had chosen each other through months of observation began the beautiful work of building a life together, guided by wisdom passed down through generations, but creating something uniquely their own. A partnership built on respect, strengthened by patience, and blessed by the entire community. If you watched this far, it's because this story resonated with something deep inside you. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far," so I can get to know you and know who really values these authentic stories of human connection. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that real love is built through patience, observation, and respect. Subscribe to this channel for more untold stories of human connection that will change the way you see relationships forever.